All right, all right. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the first episode of Georgie Tech, today's podcast. And today's something I think we're going to get a little bit of maybe a little personal, right? And so, something I think that is important is to speak about how I got where I'm at today in home automation and how difficult it was, and how much do I actually recommend someone to potentially, eventually, if you're trying to get into the industry, maybe someone in the industry and it caught your eye on the fact that maybe, what, I want to do that. That'd be dope. That'd be something that I could see myself doing. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you guys for tuning in, Georgie Tech. Don't forget to follow me on X. This is going to be on YouTube as well later on, after the live ends here on X. So stay tuned to that. Don't forget to subscribe on my YouTube as well. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and do whatever you got to do. Send me some DMs as well. What else should we talk about on this podcast in Georgie Tech and Liberty in Tech? So let's kind of start there, I guess. So why Georgie? All right. Some people tell me like, hey, don't you mind it that someone calls you Georgie, because you're a grown ass man or whatever? And to tell you the truth, I don't really care. And that is only because I don't know. I think since a kid, everyone would call me Georgie, and then eventually it's just kind of get on. I never told anyone anything. I don't mind it, right? I don't really care for it, but I do like it. So overall, everyone would always tell me, hey, make sure you use Georgie for this, Georgie for that. And and so I think this is the first time I decided to use Georgie in the name of anything content related, right? And so, and I love tech since a little kid. I was that one person breaking things apart, opening it up. How does it work? And it was just something that my mom and, or at least my parents, my mom and my dad, at some point they decided to like, hey, you know what? If you want to get anything electronic, right, it's going to be something secondhand. Someone gives it to you. But yeah, they had enough of me, diving into and breaking it apart. And then eventually it doesn't work. So my parents are like, if we're going to spend money on that and you're just going to break it, like, what's the whole point? But overall, I think that's where my curiosity kind of started, eventually when the internet and the computer going on and stuff like that. But one of the things that really eventually, so being in the military, I think, regardless of what my job was, I was still doing these things, excuse me. And one of the things that eventually would lead on to, moving back to the civilian world, and overall as far as what I wanted to do. But regardless, the whole tech never started. I never stopped. And so eventually when I got into home automation, at that point it was like, it really opened my eyes on what you could do, right, without actually having to open things up and break it, and how to make things talk to each other. And it was something cool. It really something that really I kind of fell in love with, right? And yes, I have families always asking questions, trying to call me on how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I set up an Alexa? How do I set up a Google? Or why is my Wi-Fi sucks, or whatever the case is? And as I got into more into the in the industry, now making it as a profession and having it here at home, some of the things that really caught my attention was that every consumer product, at the end of the day, they're gonna praise their product, right? I think that doesn't change it whatsoever. And so one of the things that I told myself was like, well, sometimes things don't work the way they say they work, right? You look at those ads, everything's working, and you eventually you get the product and you're having issues, and then just to realize that, well, it's not necessarily just the product but the Wi-Fi, but what if it is a glitch on the product, et cetera, et cetera. So I really dove into the idea of, well, things are broken still, right? So um so eventually, once you kind of figure out little tricks here and there or whatever, I was a big believer on, hey, if you're gonna buy a product and you believe or you think that it's always gonna work the way it works, you're gonna tell yourself like, nah, that's not like, yeah, some products are like what, 400-700 bucks, and out of all the features that it supposedly does, it's only able to maybe do like, half of it, and you tell yourself like, what's wrong with this? And so I think that's where the idea of like liberate tech comes in, because tech could do a lot of different things. It is designed and it's been an engineer to do all of these things, but I think there is that user error aspect where you tell where maybe you're doing something wrong, maybe you ditch that manual, and instead of reading it and really understanding, now some features, yeah, they're probably new, they're probably in the first iteration on the firmware, and so maybe it's not fully public yet as far as this particular feature works, and so you tell yourself like, man, that's crazy, but overall I think that no product is perfect, right? No product is bulletproof. And we have to understand that as a consumer, because if we decide and tell ourselves that, man, well, this thing sucks, why did I spend $1,000 for something that doesn't even do half the things that it was promised, but I think that's where the whole aspect of Liberty Tech came in, and at least thinking about what as far as this podcast should be or what we should do. But yeah, but today we're going to be talking about as far as, what is a home integrator programmer. People talk about, being in the home or the smart home industry. And there's one thing that is out there that everyone knows about. Well, yeah, he's just like a tech guy. He's a technician that comes here. He puts things together. He'll mount my TV. He'll set up my Wi-Fi, and that's pretty much it. A lot of people still don't see this as a potential, full blown trade. And which bothers me, because you have the electrician, you have the plumbers, you have the HVAC technicians coming in, and they all have all of these codes to follow. You could only do certain things because a certain code in a certain state, especially in California, since I live in California, it's like there's all these restrictions and regulations, and I know it's all part of safety, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not trying to compare an electrician compared to a low voltage technician, because that's what, we're called. We're a low voltage technician, because I know their theory is something that they have to master, right? They have to specialize in what they do, versus, a low tech integrator or, low voltage technician, depends on who you're working with. If you're working with if it's your own company, what type of services do you offer? It's different, right? Because, as far as a low voltage technician, there's a lot of things that you could actually be disciplined in, versus an electrician. Well, there's kind of residential and commercial side, right? And so you're kind of like, well, I only do residential stuff, so this is what I'm gonna master, and this is what I'm gonna really dive into. Versus on the commercial side, it's different, right? But overall, there's kind of two directions where you end up as an electrician. Now, electricians obviously learn about one type of signal, right? and that's going to change based on the voltage, on the amperage, on whatever type of circuit they're doing. And that's pretty much it, right? Because they're an electrician. Um, sure, there are a couple of things where an electrician could eventually face when they have to troubleshoot certain circuits. Maybe some lights are not doing what they're supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. And finding those ghosts in their world is very different to a low voltage technician, but overall, it's like I still don't understand why it's not a trade, or at least like a certified trade, where you start to see some of the stuff that we do in high schools or in colleges. They might speak a little bit on it, maybe on the smart home side or being an HVAC technician, and or the alarm side of it, but there's not much versus like, oh well, I'm a certified electrician, I'm a certified plumber, and no disrespect to any of those trades, but I think it's at some point we have to get there, right? But going back to the whole podcast for today, what is a home integrated programmer? So within home automation, or if you're an integrator, depends on the services that you do. There's a lot of different little positions there. So the first one would be kind of like what I call an apprentice. And the apprentice is going to be the person that, is going to play different roles, right? From assisting, if you're going to be, if you're an installer, mounting the TVs, running wire during the pre-wire, or you're just kind of like the guy that we're gonna push around, but overall, it's gonna be you're that guy that you're in a precious position, because you would then start to ask yourself, well, sure, I want to become an installer, because at one point I'm gonna go ahead and run my own show, and I'm gonna have my little sidekick that's gonna help me out. Or ultimately, you could then start looking at, well, maybe I want to be a programmer, the person that's gonna make all the integration happen, right? But overall, it's like you're in a position where you want to do that more of that physical labor, or do you eventually want to kind of use your brains a little bit more? Sure, I think as a programmer, you should still be doing some of the physical stuff, especially if you're dealing with a lot of new individuals in your team, right? Or someone that is looking up to you and asking you, how do you do this, or how do you do that? It's still something that you have to kind of get, down and dirty, and still use that drill, use your screwdriver, use your drywall knife, and, pick up the hammer, man, don't be shy. But overall, it's like, yeah, so you have your apprentice, you have your installer that is now going to be having that role where I think there's that principal installer, and then there's that, lead installer. Maybe the installer kind of understands what he needs to do. He could get some, some directives. Hey, go mount this TV. Measurements are XYZ, whatever, and maybe it's like a 43-inch, something small in the kitchen or whatever. But as far as like a lead-in technician, now it's like you're running the show, right? You have a scope of work, and this is what we're gonna be doing, and so it's gonna be up to you to now. Depends, different companies have this position as a lead installer. They might have some client facing situation where, they're talking to the client or the assistant of the client. And how tall should we mount this TV? If it's going to be a bigger project and all of that is good to go, you're installing speakers, making sure, depends on the phase, right? Because there's different phases, but now you're kind of now responsible for how that project should move or be executed, right? As far as how you're actually gonna mount that speaker, how are you gonna mount this TV, where exactly, if on the pre-wire side, how are we gonna run those wires, what's the best path, having that communication with the general contractor, maybe having conversations with electrician. They might take certain pathways that might be a little bit more difficult for us because now we have to kind of go around. And obviously, you cannot mix high voltage with low voltage, and so, but that's that individual. And I think that, and there's a lot of people that stay in this position for very long. But at the end of the day, it's like, we just get older. If you're not hitting the gym or anything like that, it gets to a point where you will start to get a little bit of fatigue, it's a little difficult at that point, because then you tell yourself, like, man, do I want to do this? Now, not all installers eventually move on to programming, because programming, which we'll talk about here in a bit, I think it's a whole different skill set. A lot of, at least personally, a lot of people that I know that eventually move on into programming or get a little taste of that programming action, and they eventually tend to, not do it. And one of the reasons, I think it's because there is a lot of patience you must have. You will have you're going to be client facing. You'll be talking to the client. The client might give you, so there's a lot that goes on. And so a lot of them eventually kind of, like, hey, I want to do that, George. I'll stick to installing. And you tell yourself, like, all right, that's what you want to do, but yeah. But as far as a programmer, right? So let's start off with the quote unquote professional AI overview from Google, what it actually is. So to become a home integrated programmer, you need to develop a strong foundation in programming, electronics, networking, and home automation protocols, gaining experience with various smart home devices and systems, and ideally obtaining relevant certifications like those offered by CEDIA, which stands for Custom Electronic Design and Installation Association, to demonstrate your expertise in the field. So let's kind of stop there. There's a lot to punch in there. So let's first talk about CEDIA. I am technically a member of CEDIA. Do I have a certification from CEDIA? The answer is no. Why not? That kind of contradicts, because I was just talking about, well, I want, at least my industry to be a trade like the electricians. And obviously an electrician has to be certified, right? Now, I don't think that there is a certification out there for home, or being like a home integrator, that has really nailed it down. And the reason, and where I'm coming from, is that technicians certification is like, well, you got to study X amount of hours and have X amount of time, and then obviously use that knowledge, and you're going to be taking this standardized test for that certification. It depends on the state that you're in, and in some states you might have some subsections within a city or a county, but overall it's like the quote unquote home integrator certification, like the one CEDIA offers. It's like, I don't want to bash on CEDIA. I love everything that what CEDIA stands for, and how it helps for when it comes to networking within the field. But overall, it's like a sales pitch, right? It's like, well, how do you sell smart home systems, and this is what you got to do. You'll learn the theory behind every little aspect of what goes on, but overall it's like, well, and this is how you could upsell, and it's something that I don't understand why. I mean, I don't know, we're not a pyramid scheme or anything, but it's like, it almost makes it seem like, you have to sell. And I mean, yeah, if you want to go into sales, you want to build your own business, and you got to have that sales approach, I get it. But if you really want to train up a technician or a programmer, put them through a curriculum where they will become, the master of the trade, and they understand, so that when they're thrown out in a job or in a full-on project that's going to take a couple weeks to complete, or maybe a year and a half, depending on the size of it, you know like I mean, yeah, don't expect them to sell, right? Now they should understand that, well, if something's not working and the client is like, well, how do we make this work? Yeah, maybe understand where you need to learn about products. You have to learn about, well, this solution that was sold, there's a few issues because of XYZ. Maybe something on the music side didn't work the way the client intended it to work. And so now you have to be like, well, this is other product. And so I think that should still be part of like what, as a home integrator, installer, technician, programmer, you still have to have that. But overall, like, but as far as like a certification, that's why I haven't taken it, because it's like, I don't think that it's worth taking it at this time until I'm able to find that right choice, that right, certification. If someone eventually creates like a standardized, certification that really means a lot, that is something I will carry, and that will make me more valuable as a person, in the profession. But hey, I might take it, I might not take it, but yes, there is that certification. It talks about here, develops a strong foundation in programming. So as a programmer, I think the programming side, right? We're not sitting there writing code like back in the day with Crestron, but there will be times where you do have to, debug a system, or debug a driver, a profile, in order to understand how does it work, what is the XLM behind, code behind it, what is it actually doing, because sometimes you hit a wall where you're just like, and tech support is taking forever to get on the phone with you, and so sometimes you have to kind of use that time. So yeah, there will be, I think, strong foundation in programming where you have to, I open up let's just say if I open up an XLM file, and then you're like, what the hell is this? Like, how do you even read this? Like, kind of get used to that. Maybe take some videos online. I know there's courses online that you can also take, how to learn XLM, C++, Python, etc., etc. So just kind of familiar yourself with that. The other part is the logical aspect of programming, right? So if you do take a course within learning a certain language, then you're kind of are gonna get into that, right? Learning the logic behind languages and how programs or applications actually, are actually executed and working, so it's something that you have to kind of just understand, right? That if you want A plus B to do C, how is A and B gonna talk together so that they could eventually do C, right? And then how does C affect, maybe there's some feedback coming back to B and not A, and maybe A is also receiving it, and it's getting and it's getting confused or whatever. But but yes, having that strong foundation in programming, I think it's important. At least have some fundamentals and learn as you go. So also to a foundation in electronics, sure, you have to be able to understand how your phone works, how to actually manipulate your iPhone, how to set up an Alexa, how to set up Google Home, how to do a basic network, and how these things work, right? So I should be able to ask you the question, hey, this X device is not working. Let's go ahead and factory reset that. Let's go back to square one. And so things like that, right? Be aware of your product and be comfortable with electronics so that you understand how to do that, or maybe where to look for. Go on Google, look for the data sheets, or the manual and how to reset that certain product. The other one is networking. I think in today's world, in home automation, I think networking is like your number one, right? You could be okay in electronics, or maybe you're not even you're not nothing in electronics. You know, you're just kind of the basics. Maybe you don't know nothing about networking, or I mean programming, and you're maybe jumping into it. You're kind of wanting to learn in the field, and that's totally okay. But I think networking is like the number one thing in today's age. Every single automation system, if we're talking about Savant, if we're talking about Crestron, or even Control 4, we are everything talks over the network from the processor, or Savant calls the host, to all of the devices on the endpoints, right? All the TVs, all the Apple TVs, all the amplifiers, all the home theater receivers, etc., etc. Everything is on the network, and probably the number one issue when it comes to troubleshooting, or when you're kind of finalizing your first deployment, you're gonna come across an issue on the network. And especially once, let's just say you're done with your network, and eventually the client moves in, or maybe the client was already living there, um, and you notice that a lot of depending on what the client is doing on the network, maybe they're working from home, having conference calls, they're using their printer, they have a few, maybe they have like a Sonos or like a Wi-Fi, speaker where they're playing music in the background, et cetera, et cetera. They have kids, they're streaming and doing all these things. And you'll notice that it becomes an issue because then you're like, okay, my system is good. And then you bring in all of those factors in, and you're just like, what the? Like, hold on. Why is this not working? Like, why is it not working, And so you're just like, ah. So, yeah, networking is probably like the number one thing overall, right? Um, and if that means, if you're going to go on the Cisco side, you could take your CCNA. If you're part of CEDIA, you're going to be taking your PCNA, right? Just kind of introductions or fundamentals of networking, learning the protocols, the OSI model, learning all these things about networking, how to set up a switch, how to set up a router, what type of feature, everything, right? To the point where also too, if you want to do some learn Wireshark for packet filtering or networking sniffing, but yeah, like networking is probably like the number one thing. Like if someone would tells me right now, hey, I want to be a programmer. Okay, well, how long do you see yourself that you're gonna be in your current position and ultimately become a programmer? And they're like, oh, I want it quick. I want it quick, and maybe they're chasing the money or whatever. And something I gotta say is, be patient. I think an ideal timeline is maybe 6 months, as the soonest. Depending on what type of skill sets you have. I mean, we can narrow that down in like 3 months, right? Depending on what you'll be tasked to do. But within 6 months to a year, I think that's relevant. So that person, if they tell me, well, I want to do it quick, George, this is what I would say. I'll be like, you know what? Hey, let's do this. You set yourselves up for 6 months. Okay, so what are you going to do in those 6 months, right? And so I think the first maybe month, maybe it's 2 months, put yourself through, I don't care what you do, how do you do it, and where do you get this content from or education, is learn networking. The first thing you want to do is networking at the end of the day, right? But let's move on here. The other one, it says that you also have to have a strong foundation in home automation protocols. Yeah, sure. Every single device, right? Like if you're learning Lutron, what, and I think that goes back to learning your product, because like Lutron, what does Lutron uses? They're using radio frequency, they're using Zigbee, they're using all of these different protocols, right? Or at least like radios. So learning that aspect, how many types of RF, how many type of RF communications are there that different products offer? If it's there's also not on the wireless side, but on the wired side, you have RS-232, or you recommend your standard 232. You have your RS-485. You have your Dante audio. You have all of these different things, right? That how all of these devices talk to each other, and you have to kind of get familiar with those things. And I think that's it's very important that you have to kind of get at least familiar with. The other one is it says gaining experience with various home, smart home devices and systems, and ideally obtaining. Okay, yeah. So let's move on to the next part. The next part, it says this usually involves a combination of technical skills, customer service, and ability to design and integrate diverse smart home technologies into a cohesive system for residential clients. Okay, yeah. Sure, the other part is going to be customer service, hands down. Maybe as an installer and as an apprentice, as a lead installer, you might have, depends on where you end up working, right? If it's in a home integrator firm, there might be companies that limit their installers from the client, and that is only because you don't want to distract that installer, right? The faster, the cleaner, and the safest way for that person, or for that person to complete his task for the day, it goes a long way. And so I mean, now there are some companies that installer will have communication, or have that front facing with the client, and so that's where you have to be able to be able to speak with someone, understand your client, listen to them. If they're frustrated, how do you deal with that? Things are going wrong and the client hasn't found out, or how are you going to tell the client there's an issue on something. And so I think that's very important. The other one is this ability to design and integrate diverse smart home technologies into a cohesive system of residential clients. So I think this one is, it's easy to explain what this means. In my own words, that means that get the product in your own house, right? I know a few programmers in today's age that still don't have like an automation home system in their home, right? Or they don't even have an Alexa. And I'm like, bro, like, and you could tell, right, when they're talking to their clients, or the way they're explaining how they're going to build their system, right, after talking to the client, and getting those notes for either, if it's either from the designer or you as a programmer, sat down with the client and, kind of put together what is possible with what was, sold to them. And then ultimately learning those restrictions, right, based on what they were sold or what they bought, and what is possible, right? And sometimes you don't want to go too far, right? You don't want to sell them the moon. But overall, it's like you have to kind of have that, that ability. But I think that's what that means, right? If you have it in your house, if you're excited about the product, if you know how it works and how it ends up breaking, and how you have to now go and fix it, your TV didn't turn on or whatever. And so if you live with it, it's like hands down important. And so at that point, you're just like, bro, like it puts you out there, right? And so, yeah, but you could tell, like, the way they talk and the stuff that they're kind of telling the client of what is possible is very limited, and a lot of clients in today's age, they get very turned off really quick with like, oh, well, I thought it could do all of this. Or I could do it. I thought it could do all of that, and no sé qué. And and so now, how do you respond to that? Because now, remember, the client got defensive, so it's important to have that, and so, yeah, but that's I mean, according to, I think we went on a whole tangent on this here. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting what it put on. But but yeah, overall, I think, yes, you have to kind of put yourself in that position. If you have already, or if you're working with another programmer, my number one advice is to pick their brain, get them annoyed, get them to learn. If they're willing to teach you, great. If they aren't, that gets a little difficult, right? But if they are willing to teach you and show you how things work, you will, ultimately be like, yeah, that's what's up, but overall, it's like, you have to put in the work. You have to put in the work. It's not easy by no means. There's a lot of education that you have to keep yourself up to date. Manufacturers are always updating their devices. New firmware is coming out. Maybe a device did an update that now it's conflicting with another device. Maybe the client is not understanding something. If it's user error or maybe a glitch that maybe they caught, be able to put out fires. But number one thing is having having the patient and being curious. Don't be afraid to break your system, right? That's all part of stress system, the system, understanding how your system works under stress. With when the CPU levels are at a point where you're just like, okay, the thing's gonna crash. You're like, hold on, let me see what's going on. Now, regardless, like, you want to do that, but overall, like, it's a good industry to be on. It's a good like, overall, like, I do not like, I don't think it's for everyone, but it's for sure something that brings a lot of value. And especially when your client is like, yeah, I like this is cool. The number one that I love hearing the most is when the client is like, the husband is like, man, my wife is gonna love this. Like, it's gonna make her life so much easier. Like, believe it or not, it's probably like, for me, I'm like, I get you, bro. The other one that I think that we haven't really seen out there, at least in the market that I work in, I haven't seen a lot of females in the industry, and I think that like, I think women could do really well. And it's it and it's only because it all comes down to customization, right? How well can you deliver a program to a client that is not just easy to use, but it's also, let's say, yeah, so it's easy to use, it's easy to navigate, right? Like, it makes sense, it works every time. But overall, at the end of the day, it's like the customization, that because the more the client ends up living with the product, right, or the system, they'll eventually start to get proficient on the system. And then they might do their own research online, how to do this, how to do that. Maybe they want to bug you. And so eventually they start to learn about new features. And so I think I'm a big believer on, do not release, every single feature available to your client, depending on the type of service that you offer. If you are working for a company that you guys are just going in, installing, setting up, doing your demo to your client, and then that's it. But if you're in a company, or if it's your own company where you're able to now go in there, and you're gonna build that relationship, because I think that's an important thing, that what happens after you're done with the system, like, what else, like, what comes after. And I think that building the relationship early in the project, towards the end, have that one-on-one, name to name first name to name by basis, and educating your clients, letting them know about new features in the future. Maybe there's an update that the client needs to do, because it could potentially, especially if you're testing any of the beta stuff, you tell yourself, well, you know what, if there's an issue here, if they don't get this fixed and it rolls out to the public, then at that point, it's like, you're gonna have to have a conversation ready for your client. So but overall it's like having that relationship is huge. I don't think that you know, you need to kind of burn a bridge with the client, especially if you know, you really want to show off and really make them understand that you gave them a really good system. But as a programmer, I think that it's important to always self educate yourself. Like you're learning as like your learning education or your education in the field like never stops. You know, Apple's always releasing things. If you're using Sonos always releasing things. All the automation systems, at least the like the three luxury systems which we'll talk about here next, they're always changing, they're always implementing, especially everything on the cloud. When they release new updates, it updates on their own, so the client might call you and like, hey George, my Savant system just did, like, I open up the app and like it looks different, like what happened, you know, especially with Crestron when they went on to their OS 3 to, I think their was, yeah, the OS 3 or OS 4 update. That was where it was like, wait, hold on. You guys are gonna release it to the mass like that? Like, hold on. Okay, we gotta tell our clients, you know. But yeah, your education as a programmer never ends. Your relationship with your installer and getting down and dirty and pulling wire if you need to, setting up some devices, setting up your infrared bugs or IR bugs, actually connecting things, building a rack. I think it's important for the programmers to still be in that, because there are times where you might hit a certain wall. And if you, and I've seen this before, where a programmer is like, you know what, George, like, I only program, bro. Like, I don't do none of the installation part. Like, that's not me. And then eventually they hit a wall, right, where they can't do certain things on their computer anymore, and they have to physically go to the rack, they have to physically move a device, they have to unplug it, or maybe they have to bring out a drill or a screwdriver, unmount the device from the wall, from the rack or whatever. And that's where they start to have an issue with, right? And they're like, oh well, I can't complete this. Why not? Oh well, I don't know what's going on with the device XYZ in the rack. Well, get your ass over there, bro. Like, go look at it. Maybe the IR fell on the Apple TV. Maybe maybe the Ethernet switch was not plugged in all the way or whatever, you know. And you know, or you know, Ethernet port or HDMI or something, you know, like things like that where you have to still, as a programmer, still do. And I hate having, like, hearing from people when they say like, oh well, you know, I only want to program. So if you want to get into programming because you're telling yourself that, oh well, that's all I'm gonna do, and some companies have remote programmers, but I think that, nah, like, I mean, in the beginning, mm-mm. In the beginning, like, you just can't do that. Like, have that mindset whatsoever. You just cannot have that mindset. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You have to tell yourself that, hey, I'm coming from the installation side, moving on to programming, but I need to make sure that I don't forget that, you know, being an installer and what the installer does, because yeah, as a programmer, sometimes if I see an issue with the system and I have to start looking at where potential the issue could be at, I have to look at back at what exactly the installer had to do, right? And so it's important to understand that, you know. So I don't see why not, man. You know, I just noticed that, like, this is not even working right. That's why it wasn't working. Okay, but yeah, like, you know, you gotta tell yourself, like, you know, if you want to be a programmer, it's not easy, but it's fun. It's fun, um, and it's something that you do get respect from, like, other trades, right, when you're the programmer, because, you know, especially, you know, there's a lot of Latinos in construction, and in the trades. And then, you know, when I walk in, they might see me mount the TV and this and that, and then ultimately they see me like actually like pulling out the laptop and start doing my thing, and so they're like, "Damn, you're a fucking chingon, man," you're a chingon, like, and I'm like, hey, but it's cool. It's cool. It's a cool position. It There is a lot of responsibility. There is some level of demand, depends on where you work at. Some companies, I've worked with different companies where they might ask a lot about you. There's companies that only ask a certain level. Hey, you know what? You're only working from project to project. You're now working multiple projects, so it might be easier. And ultimately, there's that one company that wants you to do everything. But all depends on what you're really looking for. So when it comes to like an interview, and you're going up for that program position, if it's in your current position, or current company, or you're trying to jump ship, or maybe just looking for a different opportunity, you those are a couple of the questions you got to ask, like exactly what does this position entail, what are you actually going to be doing, what are your responsibilities, so don't be afraid to do that. But overall, like my experience overall, I've loved it before. How long have I been doing this for? I've been in the industry now for this was what, back 2018, so 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 6 years, moving on to 7 years almost. um uh and there's nothing I would change other than the decisions I made on now. I was, believe it or not, I was one of those individuals that I'm like, I want to be a programmer like quick. How long did that take? From the beginning to ultimately being where I'm at today, total time, like actual in home automation, I would say maybe close to the year. I felt that I could have done it a lot sooner, right? I had that mindset. I told myself, I'm gonna get this going, I'm gonna make this happen. Next month I'm gonna be a programmer. But there's just a lot to learn, a lot to understand, especially when a system is malfunctioning and you have to debug. Like, how do you, like, those skill sets, you can't teach them, you can't read about them, you can't watch a video and learn them, because it's not until you're in there, right? You're in the fire, you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on, and learning those steps, right? Isolating your system, what exactly could be causing the issue, trying to narrow down, talking to support. Now, there's a lot of people that hate talking to support, tech support, because sometimes some of those guys could be fucking idiots. I'll be honest. But some of them will help you. And so, if you're always working with certain manufacturers, it's nice that you're able to kind of call in, request a certain individual, because that person is gonna actually help you. So it's nice, it's nice to to build that relationship with those manufacturers. But yeah, don't be afraid to do that. But last but not least, okay, so if you decided to become a programmer, or maybe someone that is a programmer, but you're not even working in the industry and you're kind of trying to find a way to get in. I think it all comes down to, and I think this question might come easier later, when it comes to, especially depending on what companies you work with, and what they actually do. So, for example, I'm a huge Savant person, and that is only because currently where I'm working at, we do Savant and Savant only. But Savant, believe it or not, was also my first home automation system that I learned to program completely. Other than URC, I think URC came first. I got my feet with the Logitech Harmony Edition, remotes. And then I got into URC. But URC, I think it's nice. I just don't like it's hard to walk into like a $20 million home and you see URC everywhere, right? And it's only because like those remotes are ugly. I just I can't get through that. Like they're ugly. So eventually when I got into Savant, like I fell in love with the remote. And then ultimately I got into Crestron, right? I learned Crestron. I never got into what you call like a certified Mac master programmer for Crestron. And the reason for that is because, look, I wanted to get into Crestron. Everything that it stands for, I was all about. Coming from Savant's side, like I'm all about that. Like I'm like, I'm gonna do that. And so when I eventually got into it, and then Crestron's like, hey, we're going to be really pushing Crestron Home, which is now Crestron has different systems, like compared to Savant, like Savant is Savant. That's it, right? Versus Crestron, like there's a residential and there's a commercial side. And so there's different versions or programs of that Crestron uses. And even within one, like ultimately like ecosystem or master program, there's like, programs within the program or applications, I guess, or applications within the program. And so, yeah. So like when I got introduced to Crestron, I wanted to learn Crestron Simple. You use PC and you learn using Windows, simple Windows, and how to build a program within there. But when Crestron is like, we're going to push Crestron Home, current company I was working with wanted to do Crestron Home. It's a lot easier. It costs literally nothing to put a programmer to learn Crestron Home. And it's a nicer interface, right? It's an interface that you don't have to spend time on building. Very similar to what Savant does, right? They have the Pro app. It's all pre-configured by the manufacturer. And so your program eventually gets reflected onto the interface. And so that's where Crestron went. So then I'm like, okay, so what's going to happen to Crestron Simple? And they're like, yeah, Crestron Simple is going to stay on the commercial side. Now, if a dealer wants to deploy that, then, we're not going to really give that support on the residential side. If like Simple is going to continue in the residential, their applications are, at least for them, their applications are focused for commercial and not so much on the residential side. Now, I think you could get away with it, but at least with the opportunity that I was given, like my Crestron, adventure or journey started quick and it ended quick because it was either I had to learn, like I don't have to really go through anything to learn Crestron Home. So, and I'm not going to have the opportunity of learning Crestron Simple. Now, maybe I could have put myself through it. But as far as like the goals of, or what I felt, like how I felt about Crestron, and their product, it was just something like, you know what, like, I'm really good at Savant already. Why restart my career and kind of take a few steps back and learn Crestron as well, and then ultimately, if I'm not going to do Savant, then I had to make the decision, and so I had to make the decision on to stay with Savant. The other one that there is Control 4. Control 4 is now this one at first, like, how would you say this? I wasn't into it, and it was only because those old remotes were ugly as well. Now, you get that little screen, right? There was very limited app support, and it was just like, man, this thing sucks. But as we went on, I think Crestron Home, I mean Crestron or Control 4 has done a lot of cool stuff. So if a lot of you guys don't Never heard of it. I think that it's getting very popular now, especially in the UK. A lot. I've been seeing a lot few YouTubers actually jumping into Control 4, so that's pretty cool, man. You know that to see like YouTuber that you watch. I mean, they're not in home automation, but just a YouTuber, getting in and praising Control 4 as their home automation of choice, and it's freaking cool. But overall, yeah, you have Savant, you have Crestron, and you have Control 4. Those are like the four top luxury level leading control systems within home automation. And then you obviously have the small ones. You have URC. Let's check them out real quick. URC um, control. You have URC. Come on, load up. Yeah, so you have URC. And then you also have Elon Control. I think I spelled it wrong. It's like Elon. Yeah, there you go. Elon. I don't even know if this is it. No, that's not even it. But yeah, I know there's other ones out there. But overall, the number one that if you yourself are trying to get into home automation, you have to be able to be able to once you kind of get in, if you're on the installer side, and then eventually want to get into programming, and you have some experience with any of these three or any of the other smaller ones, that is a big question you have to ask yourself. Like, what are you comfortable with, and what you really want to learn? Like, what do you like? And ultimately, like, I mean, some of these systems, people talk about like, oh man, like you like Savant, yeah, that's expensive. But overall, as a member in the industry, right? There's good discounts, right? There's and so like you could get a Savant system for your house, like a basic Savant system, one room, whatever, for like on about $1,000 or less, you know. So it's not nothing crazy, including Savant. I mean, Crestron and Control 4, like within $1,000 or less, like you could get something going in your house and really see how and feel like how it is to live with it. But other than that, I wanted to really keep this under the hour. So we're like 2 minutes out for the hour. So I'm excited. But thank you guys for tuning in. You know, for anyone watching this and wants to learn more about home automation. But I just wanted to make this because I think it's personal to me, and it's something that I want to kind of start off to say, what is it that I do? What is it that I do, and how I actually do it. Let me see if I could get just so that we could kind of end here. I don't even know what is going on. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. uh, Maybe I could just do this real quick. Nah, I'm not gonna do that. But yes, thank you guys for watching. We're gonna be doing pretty much every Fridays. We're gonna be dropping content on X and on YouTube. This will be on YouTube as well. So other than that, thank you guys for tuning in to Georgie Tech. I was George. It was nice meeting you, everyone. And let's start this going. Let's liberate tech. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you soon.